Some storm chasers may be getting too close.
From the sky. Debris right here. Tornado right here. Give me the tornado. Stop! Stop! Stop!
It seems many have ignored the important lessons from the May 31st, 2013 El Reno tornado event when tragically Tim Samaras, Paul Samaras, and Carl Young died because they got too close. More recently, during the May 28, 2019 Linwood, Kansas tornado event, Roger Hill's Silver Lining Tour storm chasing group, vans packed full of storm tourists, get too close, sending at least 12 to the hospital. At least 2 of the 4 Silver Lining Tour vans were hit by a tornado, rolling several times. In another example of getting too close and narrowly escaping death, this same or similar Roger Hill associated storm chasing group can be seen narrowly escaping the May 22, 2011 Joplin tornado event. The EF5 tornado, which had winds greater than 200 miles per hour, killed nearly 160 people and injured over 1,000. You can see in the video they narrowly escaped death, and someone even suggests that they speed, and there might even be some running of stop signs and red lights. All unnecessary risks that put others in danger, and certainly they almost all lost their lives. They might not be so lucky next time.
Jesus, it's there. Look at the trees. Oh my God, look at that. It's right on us. Oh shit. Shit. Right there. Oh, Jesus.
Back to the Linwood tornado event, May 28, 2019. The Linwood tornado event had 18 total injuries associated with it. Of those 18 injuries, 12 of them were from the Silver Lining Tours group. When a majority of your injuries are represented by storm chasers, it's time for a discussion. So let's take a look at some of the scientific radar data from that day to present an analysis as to what happened, how we might prevent this in the future, as well as some life-saving tips for storm chasers and storm spotters who may find themselves in a high-precipitation supercell environment. This event was a really great reminder of just how awesome dual polarization radar is. It gives us a better idea of size, shape, and variety of what we're looking at in a storm. Okay, let's take a look at a 4-panel storm interrogation of the Linwood, Kansas HP supercell. We're going to be using Topeka Weather Service's Radome radar data, so that's this little yellow dot KTWX in Kansas, and we're going to be looking towards the east, and you'll see in southwestern Douglas County to the southwest of Lawrence and west of Baldwin City a little red square, and this represents the latitude-longitude approximate GPS coordinates of the Silver Lining Tours van rollover. I believe 2 vans rolled over, but we'll call it the van rollover for the purposes of this interrogation. So the first panel, the upper left-hand panel that you see on the screen, is Doppler Weather Radar's reflectivity mode, dBz and decibels. We're looking at different intensities here. So we're particularly interested in the shape that we see, or maybe we see hook echoes, weak echo regions. We can look at even more in a cross-section, but for the purposes of this, we're looking at the lowest elevation scan, so that's the lowest tilt, and we're looking for interesting areas of the storm that capture our initial attention. On top of that, we have the upper right-hand panel called velocity mode, and this is basically Doppler weather radar detecting particle motions within the storm. So the particles could be moving towards the radar or away from it. If they're moving towards it, it has a higher frequency, higher pitch, positive phase shift, and moving away would have a lower frequency, lower pitch, and negative phase shift. So Doppler weather radar looks at these differences in phases to tell whether something's moving away or towards it. So in the case of cool values, we have winds moving towards the radar, and warm values would mean winds moving away from the radar. So We're looking for a counterclockwise motion, rotation, cyclonic rotation that we would expect with a mesocyclone. So supercells have a deep persistent rotation called a mesocyclone. So next we have the bottom left-hand panel, which is going to be spectrum width, which is the standard deviation of the Doppler spectrum. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us where we have a large distribution of velocities, a huge standard deviation of velocities, and that would mean high spectrum width. It would mean lots of turbulence there, and it's a great indicator of trying to pick out, well, we've got velocity, we've got reflectivity, but I need just a little bit more information to see where that rotation, where that possible tornado would be. So next to that, in the bottom right-hand panel, we have something called correlation coefficient, or CC. It's a measurement of how similar horizontal and vertical pulses are behaving. So this can give us a good idea of whether we're looking at rain or whether we're looking at tornado debris. So when this is co-located, meaning we have a hook echo, we have that strong rotation coupling on velocity, high spectrum width, and low CC, correlation coefficient, specifically 0.80 or below, it's a good indicator of actual tornado debris ball, the center of a tornado, good information to tell, especially in the case of an HP supercell, when if you're out there in the field, you can't see this. Well, we can look inside of the clouds and see what's going on with dual polarization Doppler weather radar. How awesome is that? So again, the red square is the location of the two Silver Lining Tours van rollover. We're looking towards the east from the Topeka Weather Service radome at a obvious HP supercell that is just to the southwest of their location. So typically on the NexRad reflectivity mode, upper left-hand panel, we'd see a kidney bean shape, and we actually see that. Keep in mind, a lot of times, real life, nature is lit, as you've heard before, nature is metal. It's not always textbook. So we have to be able to recognize not so clear shapes, but we definitely have a kidney bean shape here, consistent with a high precipitation supercell echo just to the southwest of the storm chasing tour location. So let's also look at velocity mode. We have some counterclockwise rotation going on. We have somewhat high spectrum width in the same area. So already tornado warned storm. We know where the mesocyclone is. So at any point, this is a cyclic supercell, by the way, just because it's may not be producing a tornado right now, doesn't mean we should be surprised when it does. And a lot of times you'll see, especially HP supercells, the mesocyclone, original one, may dissipate, and then maybe downstream a few miles, usually within 1 to 3 miles, a few minutes later, we get a new one, and maybe even a strong tornado out of that. So it's not exactly surprised. That's why there's a tornado warning out here. There's enough radar information to issue a radar-indicated tornado warning. So I'm going to take off the warning there, and we're going to place this into motion and step through some frames. And again, we're looking for shapes. We're looking for intense echoes, anything that catches our attention in any one of these panels, and then we're going to look at all of them together to see what's going on. So let's forward here. And you'll notice something else. As I go through these scans, the rotation, everything is still there. So we have persistent echoes. So we still have an intense kidney bean shape echo, maybe even a little weak echo. You see that right there, indicating a strong updraft. We'll probably see that a little bit better with a cross section, but I'm not going to do that for the sake of time in this video. But we definitely have rotation. And again, the other thing to consider, we're looking at real-time data here. Situational awareness is the environment. So a lot of times, it's, especially as a storm spotter or chaser, easy to get a little bit of tunnel vision. But don't forget, regardless of what's going on right now on radar, the environment, the atmosphere in the area, the storm environment, it's conducive for long track tornadoes that day. So that should be in the back of your head at all times. So let's forward here. So far, we still have an interesting area of high spectrum with lots of turbulence here. We have some pretty good rotation going on. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe several weak tornadoes have already occurred. And the next thing I want to mention here too is obviously the nature of an HP supercell. The visibility is going to be horrible. In some cases, especially if you do something called core punching, that would mean basically driving through an intense precipitation core, which is what you would have here. A lot of times these are rain-wrapped tornadoes. You won't be able to see them until they're on you, and that's actually what obviously happened to the Silver Lining Storm Tour group here this time. So already they're very close to the leading edge of the high precipitation supercell. So visibility would start getting reduced here, it'd probably start raining, and you probably wouldn't be able to see much pretty soon after that. So let's keep forwarding here. We still have decent rotation going on, that persistent spectrum width. Look at the shape. Remember what I was saying? Do you see a little bit better of the kidney bean shape? And we have an intensification going on here too. So let's also continue. And at this point, visibility is horrible. They're very close to where the tornado would be. And this is something else to point out with radar data. It's great to have it, but again, our network isn't that dense, even though we have over 120 of these across the United States. We can't exactly see very small scale things, and we can't exactly see exactly at the surface. So we're looking at thousands of feet up in the air. Thankfully, radar can give us some clues as to what's going on at the surface. So here's a potentially life-saving tip for storm chasers and storm spotters that might find themselves in an environment like this. We can identify the main area of circulation and paint an imaginary line in our head, much similar to a hurricane cone of uncertainty, the track path for a hurricane. Consider the storm track path for a tornadic supercell, a cyclic supercell that even though a tornado might not be occurring right now, we know the main area of circulation and we know that it's cyclic. It could reform a couple of miles away and we give it a little bit of space to deviate. The main thing is we don't get too close. We don't get underneath it, we don't get in the path of it, and certainly in the case of an HP supercell, we keep our distance from this imaginary line. And think about this line later on when we look at the damage path and see if this southwest to northeast imaginary line doesn't fit almost perfectly, both with this storm and other historical examples of the typical damage path for classic and HP supercells. So back to the van's rollover location, consider this. Pretty good spectrum width. It's very close to the van location right now, and I would imagine they're already getting heavy rain and not able to see this. We see an intensification here. This is likely a tornado co-located with a decent high spectrum width, co-located with a strong echo. And we actually see here about 60, 70 knots of shear. Sometimes we refer to this as gate to gate. So again, we're not looking at the exact surface, but we're looking a little bit higher in the atmosphere of the rotation. So we have winds counterclockwise going away from the radar, winds coming towards the radar. And gate to gate, we're basically referring to pixels here close together. So when they're close together, it's a very good sign, especially if they're high values, that we have strong rotation. The radar data would certainly suggest that whatever hit them was existing, a tornado was occurring. It's important not to just look at one product, but to look at multiple products. Get as much information as you can. Situational awareness is key. It's definitely in the nature of a cyclic supercell to produce multiple mesocyclones. Usually they're not too far distance from the previous mesocyclone, but you have to keep that in the back of your head, that this idea that it could produce a tornado at any time, anywhere near this area, and you just can't get too close to it. Certainly in the case of an HP supercell, you're not going to be able to see this most of the time in the field until it's right on top of you. And at this point, also keep in mind, it takes a couple of minutes for the radar data, especially the scans, to complete a product. So we're not able to see what's going on in between that time. So I would imagine at some point we would also see some debris in the air here, which is probably what we're actually seeing, right about here. So CC is already showing probably weak tornado debris. And again, it's such a small thing to pick out that it's hard to tell, but we can look at the other clues in the storm to tell us that's likely what you'd be seeing at that point. So high precipitation, lots of rain, low visibility, tornado occurring, and it basically moves over them at this point. Somewhere around this point, obviously they get hit by the main area of rotation, the tornado that's occurring here, and they roll over. Here's a close-up view of the Lone Star area around the time that the vans rolled, roughly 23:04 Zulu or 6:04 p.m. So let's keep going here forward. And be paying close attention to CC here in just a second as I forward through frames. We're going further in time. So the rollovers already occurred. The two storm-chasing tour vans have already rolled over. Thankfully, it wasn't that strong of a tornado. But watch what happens here. Forwarding here, we still have, look, stronger rotation. It's very fortunate that whatever was occurring during the time of the rollover, it definitely wasn't as strong as the actual Linwood tornado event. You really have to be careful in the case of an HP supercell and give yourself enough buffer, enough distance from that main area of rotation where we would expect to find a tornado. When looking at an animated 4-panel series, we can see the storm approach them, and they are in the direct path of where we would expect to find a tornado. At some point, the impact occurs here, and just a few miles, just a few minutes towards the northeast, this storm rapidly intensifies. The rotation rapidly intensifies, and this becomes a very strong tornado. Eventually, the Linwood EF3, EF4 tornado. Looking at a close-up of when this rapidly intensified, we see a very strong mesocyclone and all the key indicators that would indicate we have a damaging tornado. So we have high spectrum width, we have a very strong velocity couplet in the area where we would expect to find this co-located with a 0.80 or below correlation coefficient, or CC, all the key indicators of a damaging tornado. A reminder not to core punch, drive directly into a heavy precipitation supercell that's obscured, that rain obscuring the view of the tornado. They refer to that as the bear's cage, meaning you don't want to be in the cage, referring to a tornado, of a wild animal. Bad things happen, you're too close. That's what happened in this case. Radar's now telling us this is a monster storm, getting ready to produce a monster tornado. Now we have over 115 knots of gate-to-gate shear. It's also worth noting that this is not exactly what's going on at the surface. And the storm likely produced multiple mesocyclones. This may be a stronger mesocyclone that eventually goes on to produce the Linwood, Kansas tornado event. Our confidence is high, given all these indicators that we have here, that we have a damaging tornado. We have co-location here with high spectrum width, once again. Low CC, strong couplet. That couplet's getting even more impressive. We have intensification, still the evident kidney bean shape on radar, and it's persistent. We knew it was only a matter of time at this point when the damage reports started to come in to just show how serious this was. It's one thing to see it on radar on a digital screen, but it's another thing to witness and experience it in real life. It's surreal to witness in person the power of nature. This should be a very serious learning event, especially for the storm chasing tour operators. So let's continue here. Very significant mesocyclone, strong HP supercell moving just to the west of Eudora right now. Very scary as we get intensification going on here. Debris ball still in the air. I believe somewhere at this point, especially as we get closer towards Linwood, the Channel 9 helicopter gets live video of this massive tornado, and it's obviously as predicted by radar here, and as we know, the nature of HP supercells, rain wrap. It's very hard to see, and in fact, that may also make it look like it's larger than it actually is. It may hide the actual tornado in the center of it. So very impressive when we saw that, and at least people had a good amount of warning. They saw it visually with the helicopter, and we saw it on radar, and we have several spotters that said they could see a huge area of rotation, thinking that this was a mile-wide tornado. And at this point, because this is persistent, we have all of the meteorological scientific indicators to make a diagnosis here. We have a damaging tornado. Our confidence is high in radar data. I start getting worried at this point. I know this area. I'm very familiar with it. I used to live there. I have family there. So I contact the Bonner Springs and Edwardsville Police Department because I actually thought this storm was going to just destroy the mobile home parks in Edwardsville and Bonner. There's a lot of trailers out there, and this was headed right for them. So I think 10,000 people saw that message, and this could have been so much worse. This is such a significant storm here. And it was taking on an interesting similar path to the May 4th, 2003 tornado event. I was actually out during that when it hit the Wyandotte County area. So this took on a very similar path. I thought deja vu, it's happening all over again. In an even more populated area because they've built so much in both Wyandotte and Johnson County, Kansas. At one point, look at this, just to the northwest of Eudora, over 150 knots of gate-to-gate shear. That is just impressive. So again, we've got that strong velocity couplet here. We've got the low CC high spectrum width. And we actually have a little bit of an indication here of kind of, you'll see this as spin if I were to put this, animate this, an actual debris ball signature on radar. So we've got debris in there, damaging tornado, moving towards a very populated area towards the Linwood area. And just think again, had the tour group tried to drive into this thing, they wouldn't have survived. So the tornado approaches Linwood here, just absolutely devastating here. Debris ball, debris everywhere, EF3, EF4 damage in the Linwood, Kansas area. And let's continue in time. So we have a little bit of dissipation going on as it moves into southeastern Leavenworth County, Kansas, but it's still there and very ominous on radar, and it's approaching Bonner Springs. So people in Wyandotte County really lucked out, because as this approached the Wyandotte County, Leavenworth County line, it dissipated right about there. We still had some tornado debris falling. We still had some wind damage, I also believe, but it dissipates at this point. Now, keep in mind, once again, we talked about an imaginary line. Since this is a cyclic supercell, just because we don't have a tornado occurring right now doesn't mean we shouldn't expect one at any moment. Matter of fact, we still know the location of primary circulation. Can you see where that's at? So look on velocity. Remember the direction. Remember the colors we talked about before. It's right about there, right over Bonner Springs, the center, the mesocyclone, center of rotation for this cell. So if we were to draw an imaginary line with that, considering the storm path, the past movement and the future movement, we can get an idea of where we might expect a tornado. It should not be a surprise. Again, cyclic supercells, especially HP supercells, it's in their nature to produce multiple tornadoes. It shouldn't be a surprise. And in fact, once again, what we'll see is usually an old mesocyclone decays and a new one forms within 1 to 3 miles in a matter of minutes. Sometimes it's very quick from the original, and in some cases it could be actually fairly strong tornado. So that's something to keep in mind here. And in fact, later on, this moves through Wyandotte County without producing a tornado, and once it gets into Missouri, it actually produces another tornado. And you'll see, I would suspect that the tornado path is going to be right along that southwest to northeast imaginary line we just drew. I suspect that's what we'll find when we look at the actual damage path. So at this point, it dissipates as it's moving through the Wyandotte County area. Thankfully, saved probably a lot of people's lives just by dissipating that day. There's so much new construction, new homes, so many more people in Wyandotte County and Johnson County that they lucked out this day. But unfortunately, Linwood got hit, and unfortunately, we had the storm chasing tour group almost get killed. 12 people in 2 vans rolled over. So big learning opportunity. We learned a lot from this thing. It's a very impressive storm, and we should keep that in the back of our heads, that it's never a good idea to drive into a HP supercell's area of main rotation. Based on the radar data, it would seem there was an existing tornado that either strengthened, or within a mile of that location, a new tornado forms and strengthens into what would be the Linwood, Kansas tornado event. Either way, the storm-chasing tour group core punched directly into an existing tornado. There's some other radar clues, especially during the cross-sections, and especially considering the location of weak echo regions, that they basically drove into the path, the main area where we would expect a tornado to be occurring. This is what sets a supercell apart from a standard air mass thunderstorm. Supercells, by their very nature, are often long-lasting, self-sustaining storms. And in fact, if we take a look at some historical awesome examples of just how long a supercell lasted, take a look at this tornado outbreak. Single supercell image. It's a series of images. A single supercell lasted several states. Look at this. All the way to Georgia. It starts back in, I believe, Mississippi. That is just impressive. And if we were to maybe place that imaginary line, the do not trespass line we talked about before, do you see where it would go? And where would you expect a tornado to occur? Where would the damage be? This imaginary line should be in the back of your head, and we've seen it throughout history, historical tornado outbreaks, this very pattern. And again, the nature of a cyclic supercell thunderstorm is that at any time you can get a tornado that might last a little while. It might not be too impressive. It might dissipate. But within seconds, minutes, maybe 1 to 3 to 4 miles northeast, downstream of that location, we get a new area of rotation. A stronger tornado develops, and maybe that tornado's on the ground for a long time. It is not a satellite tornado. It is in the main area of rotation. It shouldn't be a surprise, certainly in the case of a long-lasting, long-lived supercell with a history of producing tornadoes, especially if it previously produced a damaging tornado, and especially if it's in a conducive environment for tornado genesis. So when considering the actual damage path from the damage assessment work that was done on the Linwood, Kansas tornado, you can see the track, the imaginary line that we talked about before that goes from southwest to northeast, only now it's not imaginary. This is the actual damage path. It's what we expected. And this indicates that there was an ongoing tornado. They basically ran into the existing tornado, and then at some point, far less than a mile away, a new, stronger tornado forms into what would be the very significant, strong Linwood, Kansas tornado event. The tornado damage path also suggests that this was an existing EF1, EF2 tornado that had been on the ground for some time that they drove directly into. This is also going to coincide with their video when they made the observation of tornado debris falling from the sky. So approximately 0.18 kilometers to the north, we actually see a new, stronger mesocyclone form, and it actually produces the stronger Linwood, Kansas tornado. According to the damage assessment information itself, it looks like anywhere from 90 to 115 mile-per-hour winds caused the van to roll over. The storm-chasing tour group lucked out. Had they been slightly towards the northeast in the path of what would be called the Linwood tornado event, they would have not likely survived the experience. So when we look at a couple of velocity approximations as well as the actual damage assessment that was done, it would appear that they ran into approximately EF1, EF2 rated winds. So more than likely around 100 mile-per-hour winds to about 115 mile-per-hour winds rolled these vans. And had it been higher than that, we would have been talking about more than injuries. Hopefully they learned from their mistakes. Many potentially life-threatening mistakes were made, and some are obvious in the video. You're driving into a rain-wrapped HP supercell main area of rotation with tornado debris coming down, and you continue. And this is not the first time getting too close and narrowly escaping death with a van load of tourists. Behavior like this gives storm chasers a bad name, and it angers the first responder community, and rightfully so, because during the major Linwood tornado, they were tied up with this unnecessary event. There were some very bizarre responses when the tour group was asked what happened. There's also a witness from inside of one of the vans, a Santa Barbara lady, that actually says the tour operator was aware of a tornado threat to the south, but they continued to drive to try to get in front of it. Despite being rain-wrapped, the visibility was terrible. For some reason, they continued to drive directly into a tornado. This was not an unexpected satellite tornado event. This is a tornadic cyclic HP supercell being a tornadic cyclic HP supercell. This event was preventable. The video shows they got too close. The radar data and damage path shows they got too close. But what does too close mean? Too close means you didn't give yourself enough time, enough distance to recognize the threat, the danger. Maybe at the same time it also means you didn't give yourself enough time to escape. It's never a good idea to drive directly into a tornado-worn high-precipitation supercell, directly into the main area of circulation with no visibility and a van load of tourists. The last thing anybody needs is a van load of tourists dying because of unnecessary risk. So consider science, learn from our mistakes, keep a safe distance with a respect for the atmosphere, because these HP supercells are nothing to play around with.
Tornado right here! You're in a tornado! Stop! Stop! Stop!
Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like unique science and tech content, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to us, follow us on our new social media, and check out our website, ultratechlife.com.